Hi, good evening. This is Jamie Kokensparger. Welcome to Soil Savvy Tonight. If you see the housekeeping notes on our intro screen, we should be having just the presenters on video and speaking tonight. Put your soil questions in the chat box. We will answer those at the end of the session. And also the chat box for the general questions. And due to our large virtual audience tonight, again, thank you everyone, we will not be able to answer any specific property questions such as a tree problem on your property, but we'll be more than happy to answer those directly during our office hours by email or by phone, which that contact information will be at the end of our slides today. So let's go ahead and dig in. Dirt versus soil. Have you ever thought about that? Is there a difference between dirt and soil? We like to say there is because we like to think of the living soil. And if you look at our soil cloud over here, all the different words that come up that help describe soil are related to soil. Maybe you've not thought of so many of those before, but that is what makes up the living soil, the soil that gives us life. Most of life on Earth as we know it is based on a good soil. So dirt is soil with that life kicked out of it. It's missing some things, missing some ingredients, not going to do what we need it to do. So we don't want dirt. Don't treat your soil like dirt. We want good living soil. So if you've heard of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we're going to do Goldilocks and the Three Soils tonight because Goldilocks was always looking for the one that was just right. So what is the best soil? Is there such a thing as the best soil? A lot of that's going to depend on what are you trying to grow? Where are you at? What plants are going to be there? So maybe not one best soil, but the best soil for what you're planning to do for your yard or garden. And we're going to be looking at trying to help your soil, not change your soil type. We get a lot of questions here at our office about that. Maybe you have a clay soil. People think, well, what if I just add a bunch of sand to it? That'll fix it. And you may know that sand and clay often equal more like concrete. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to develop a really good soil that has all these moving parts in it that are going to work together for the plants versus trying to change your soil type. It's very difficult, if almost impossible to do, to change the type, but we can help our soil. Okay, we're taking a look here at a soil profile. Underneath your feet, there are layers, kind of like a layer cake, and different areas have different levels of these layers. Some are thicker, some are thinner. It's not kind of straight across as this diagram shows, kind of waving underneath your feet. So around your property, you may have areas with more topsoil, less topsoil. Areas here in Northwest Ohio where we are at, we might have some bedrock sticking out of the top, so no topsoil at all. But what we're looking at for what you're going to probably want to do in your yard are the top two horizons. The O horizon, which is the organic layer. So that's all that organic matter that's coming down from plants and decomposing. And the A layer is your topsoil. So this is where most of that life is going to be, most of the action. And underneath, we get into other layers, not quite so active and much more difficult to do anything to enhance it. So we're kind of going to focus on these top two layers. If you're not sure about what layers are in your yard, you can get a soil probe. That is this tool here, down here on the left. And our office, our soil and water office, does have those to loan out for residents to go out and take a peek at their soil. Check your local soil and water office or NRCS office and see if they have one. And then when you pull that soil probe out, you can see in the one down here on the bottom that it does show you those layers, starting with the organics at the top, and the color changes as it goes down. So you can see how deep those layers are on your property. If you don't have a soil probe though, you can use a narrow shovel, a post hole digger, anything like that to get down and see if you can find those layers. Soil texture. This is what most people think of with their soil, describing it, clay or sandy soil. And if you look up on the right side here, we have a diagram of sand, silt, and clay, the relative comparison of those particle sizes. So if you think of sand, a grain of sand you've probably seen, or maybe salt that you might have at home, that is the size of a sand particle. That is when it is no longer rock, it is officially soil, it's graduated, and that is our largest soil particle. In comparison, silt is in between. It's more like baking soda if you want to take a feel of that at home. Or then clay is like flour. It is so small, so tight, and that's why those clay soils have a lot of trouble with that water flowing through them. But that's also good. They can also hold water during drought when we might need it. So most people in their yard or garden might have heard of loam as that being just right. There's our Goldilocks soil. But again, it depends on what you're trying to grow. So maybe loam isn't exactly what you need. Your plant or your tree that you might want might need something a little in between these others. So let's take a look at those. How to determine your soil texture? There are some easy ways to do this at home. The first one is just a soil rub. Get a pinch of soil, stick it in your palm, add some water, rub it around. How does it feel? Does it feel smooth, silky? That might be more like the clay or the silt. Is it grainy, kind of rough? You might have some sand or probably a mixture of both. Soil ribbon. You're just taking a wad of soil and putting it between your thumb and your forefinger and squeezing it, and a ribbon should start to form, and depending on how long that ribbon is, may tell you what your soil is. A soil ball, making that 1-inch ball. A sandy soil probably won't make one at all. If it's clay, it might make a really good ball, but if you do make a ball, give it a squeeze. If it falls apart pretty easily, it's more of your loam. If it does not, holds its nice shape, and more of a clay. And a soil shake. Just put some soil in a jar with water that you can see through, give it a good shake, and then leave it sit for a couple of days, and those different soil texture layers will layer out in that jar. So you get a good approximation of what percentage of each of those might be in your soil. Okay, so if we take a look at that, there's our soil ribbon. We will have this handout you see on the right available afterwards. We'll be sending that out in an email as a resource for you. You can see how that works. They start off with the soil ball, and depending on what you get from that, you can determine sand or loamy type soil. Then you can try your soil ribbon, and depending on how far of a ribbon you get, work your way down. And then on your soil rub, see how your texture works out, and eventually get to a pretty close approximation of whether you have loam, a clay, a silty clay, what you might have in your property. There's our soil shake there with the layers also. The coarse materials are going to be in the bottom, the finer materials are going to end up on the top. If you want to get really technical, you can log on up here to the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, part of the USDA. Go to their website, and in their search box, just type in soil texture calculator. You will get this online tool you can use. Maybe once you've done your preliminaries, figure this out, plug your values in, and it will give you a better texture. Looking more towards the right there with our triangle. You'll get those, and there's our ribbons also along the right of the triangle to help you estimate. And one thing that stands out with this soil triangle is the majority of the soil is clay. Interesting. The sand is very small, the silt, the sand and silty loams down here, but probably 2/3 of that triangle is going to end up being a clay type soil. Something else you can do is a percolation test. This is important if you're doing a rain garden or just generally finding a good spot to plant. We're going to be digging a hole about the size of a coffee can, basketball, fill it up with water, and then leave it set till that water completely drains. We want that soil around that hole to be very saturated. And then stick in a ruler, a measuring stick of some sort so you can keep an eye on it, fill that hole back up with water, and then leave it drain for 24 hours and mark how much of that water has disappeared. Obviously, if it's all gone, you've got a good draining soil, or if not, not so much. So you can estimate that. So Goldilocks and her 3 rules of soil. 1, the soil is alive. We don't really think of it as such, but it is. It is that living soil. It's an ecosystem all on its own, and it's the ecosystem that drives our earth and the life that we get from it. So we want all those things working together. Everything is connected. So if you don't understand how those connections work and you start maybe putting inputs in or different plants or trying a different management technique and not really understanding what that's going to do to the rest of the system, that would be using those tools incorrectly and may have the opposite effect of what you were hoping for. And then 3, our goal is to emulate nature, because nature's been doing this for way longer than we have. And if we can get our system working more like the natural system, it will help take care of us too. It's a great quote from Gail Wilson. She's with the Oklahoma State University. The biodiversity in one handful of soil equivalent to the biological diversity in a rainforest. As the soil biology declines, also the soil degrades. So the bottom line is that we need to repair that soil. If we are to promote the plants that grow in the soil, it is all interconnected. So an often quoted idea is that a tablespoon of soil or a handful of soil has more life or more organisms living in it than all the people on the face of the earth. So currently 7+ billion people. Take all the people on the earth and shrink them all down and put them in that little cup of soil in your hand, and that's a lot of life. So that's what we want to see. A soil food web. Again, all these things working together. There's our plants, organic matter, and how they feed something else all the way up. And then eventually these animals may pass along and end up also going back into our soil. So we have our nice completed circle of life. But something right here in the middle we don't often hear about is the fungi. And one in particular is a mycorrhizal fungi. And that is a big connector for our soil. A what? Mycorrhizae fungi. They have a lot of connections under the soil. So sometimes they're often called the glue that holds the soil together because of all these connections that help create the aggregates in our soil. A messenger pathway, a soil internet. Lots of new research coming out about this, about how different messages get sent by different things happening in the soil through this connection. The fungi also increase the access to nutrients and water. The roots can only go out so far. These are connecting those roots to resources way out farther than our plants and trees. Usually an indicator of a healthy microbiome in our soil, and definitely a vital cog in our soil mechanism. But one thing we do to it that really doesn't help is tilling our soil. All those rototillers, that feels good for us to do that. And we think we might be doing something good for our soil, but every time we disturb it, we are breaking those connections and they have to repair themselves over again. So we're going to try to not do much tilling. So here's that soil biology. May not have thought about this before, but take a look at all the different things going on under your feet, under maybe where you're sitting right now, all the nutrient cycling, the plant protection, even pathogen suppression. If you have a good working biology in your soil, that will reduce the number of pathogens or diseases that might be there. Detoxifying pollutants, water filtration, cleaning water systems for groundwater, all these different things that our soil is helping us out with, as long as it's a good, healthy working soil. Okay, most of us have made a recipe, and with COVID, a lot of people are turning to that, trying to be cooks at home and doing lots of things with food. So here's some recipes for soil. Our recipe for soil on the right, you can see we've got all the natural ingredients, the kind of our mineral ingredients here with the rock, sand, silt, clay. Living things are microbes, worms, insects. Past living things are decomposing materials. Dormant things, seeds, water, air, and then weather and time. So our direction there is to prepare all those components, add all the other things together, mix it all up, process it for 500 to 1,000 years, and eventually we'll end up with 1 inch of healthy soil. So if you go out and do one of the soil probes and look down and see how deep your soil is, every inch took about 500 to 1,000 years for it to form. So that is why it is so important that we keep the soil where it is, don't let it erode, and we take good care of it, because every inch we would lose, we're not going to get it back in our lifetime or our children's lifetime. So every inch is very precious to us. On the left over here is a fun activity you can do with your kids. I used to do this with school kids, but with food allergies, I'm not doing it in the schools much anymore, but you could do this at home with your family by finding some fun candy things on the left and making them represent some soil things on the right, mix up a big batch of it, have the kids sift it and sort it and see what they find in their soil sample. All right. Goldilocks and the health plan. We all need our health plan. So these are some things we're going to do to try to keep our healthy soil. Number one thing, keep it covered. Use cover crops, use mulches, do it year round. Don't let things sit empty. If you're using cover crops, even if the tops die back in the winter, those roots are still doing their job and keeping microbes going in the soil. Mulches are going to help protect it, keep the soil in place, keep it insulated, and also keep the bacteria and things going in your soil. Rotate crops, move families of veggies and flowers. So not just, well, if I planted a tomato here, I'm going to move it there, and then I'm going to put a pepper in. Peppers and tomatoes, eggplants, they're all in the nightshade family. You want to move all of those to a different bed, and then plant something maybe in the crucifery, which is your broccoli, your cabbage in that bed. And then the next year, move it around again, move it around. So you don't have the same families in the same beds year after year. That's going to perpetuate any diseases or insects or things that like those particular families. So break up that cycle. Organic matter, most important, yes, putting in compost. If you have a worm bin, again, do it responsibly. Don't let those worms out because they can become an invasive worm if they're in the environment. But a nice worm bin that you keep contained makes some really good compost. Sheet composting is just as simple as laying all of your leaves or grass clippings all in a layer and just letting those decompose back in. They also can serve as your mulch. You can get composted manure, all sorts of other organics that'll help build that organic matter in your soil. Eliminate or reducing pesticides. Weed before seed. If you get it first, that'll save you. I've always heard 1 year of not weeding means at least 7 years more of seeds and more weeds after that. So get them out, get those weeds before they go to seed. Utilizing integrated pest management, which is helping using the insects and companion planting and other things to help, again, work together as a natural system. Use resistant plants if you know there's a particular disease in your area that is very detrimental to certain plants. Try to find some that are resistant to it. Here in Northwest Ohio, cedar apple rust is something that affects apples and plants in the rose family, and it's a host on cedar. So if you have cedar trees next to apple trees, not a good combination. So learning that and just making sure you're planting resistant plants that are going to survive better. Fertilizing properly, know what you need and know what you don't need. So hopefully you don't have to put something down, or if you do, make sure you put it at the right rate, right time, right place, and also try maybe some slower releasing organics that may stay in the soil a little longer for you. And then last but not least, a soil test. Yes, get a report card for your soil property, which is what we're going to be talking about later in our presentation. All right, so one of the things your soil test will tell you is pH, which is the measurement of how acid or how alkaline a substance is, or in this case, your soil. And if you look at the right, there's a nice chart comparing the pH scale to some common everyday items you might have at home. And 7 is neutral. And if you go farther down, the red colors get more acid and the cool colors get more alkaline. It's also good to note that the higher alkaline materials can cause a burn just as bad as an acid. So it's not really good to be too far one way or the other. For plants, they tend to like right around that 6 to 7 range. But not always. So if you have blueberries, they're a very acid-loving plant. They can be down more in this 4 to 5 range. But if you'll notice, each level up or down is 10 times the level before it. So one change in pH is pretty drastic. So it can make a big difference, and it does really matter if you're in between a 6 or a 7 or a 5 or a 6 in your pH. So it also helps tie up or release nutrients. So you can put as much fertilizer on if you think you're having a problem, but if the pH is wrong, it's going to lock that particular nutrient up. It's not going to really do you any good. So it's good to know your pH and go from there. And I say mostly based on soil type because that it is, but also if you look over here on our chart, acid rain, a lot of areas have problems with that. That can change the pH of your soil. Maybe some other industrial uses that were there prior to the soil might change it. So personally, on your own, trying to change your pH is very difficult, but some larger scale effects can happen. Here's a nice chart on the influence of that pH on your nutrient availability. And there we are. There's Goldilocks in the middle. Most of the nutrients are available right at 7, 6.5, very nicely. But again, when you look over here at the 5s for our blueberries, It's interesting. Some of those aren't available, but that blueberry plant is adapted so it can get what it needs out of that particular pH soil. Okay, and then we have our nutrients that you might be looking at. If you've ever looked at a fertilizer bag, they always have these 3 numbers. And if you're not sure what those are, they're always in this order: N for nitrogen, P for your phosphorus or phosphate, and K for your potassium or your sometimes called soluble potash. Everybody asks me if P is for phosphorus, where'd the K come from for potassium? And it's just basically the P was already taken, so they assigned it the letter K. But our macronutrients are those are the biggies that the plants need. And this isn't specifically, these all work together to help influence all of these things, but nitrogen is often noticed for the green growth, lots of vigorous growth. It helps the plant with lots of energy. Phosphorus tends to be roots and tips of plants and flowers, helps those things grow. And potassium is really good for water regulation and us humans as well. So potassium can help us either keep or lose our water. And then they're micronutrients, but these are the mighty micros. They're really secondary macros, not quite as abundant or necessary, but they really are important to our plants. So calcium for your structure. If you've ever tried to grow a tomato and it gets that blossom end rot, kind of the bane of a summer gardener, that has to do with calcium. So sometimes we don't get much water, drought maybe for a few weeks, and all of a sudden we get those really heavy 3 to 4 inch rains that can leach out the calcium, and then of course the tomato tries to grow and it just doesn't have enough calcium for that structure to form. So calcium is something you might need to check on for blossom end rot in your tomatoes. Magnesium is also for the green and the chlorophyll. So if your plants look a little yellow, you might be missing some magnesium in your soil. And sulfur is really good for the enzymes that help make a lot of the processes in the plant work. So those are some of the basics, but I'm going to ask you this one. Would you go to the doctor, and if they just don't check you out, don't ask you any questions, don't do any tests, but just send you home with a bottle of medicine and say, here, go home and take this, would you do it? I wouldn't. So would you take that prescription medicine without taking a test to know if you need it or not? That's where we're going to go next. So Jessica will be coming up with our soil tests and our soil surveys for you.
All right, hi everyone. Jamie gave that excellent overview about what's in soil generally, and I'm going to narrow it down and talk about what's in your soil specifically and why and how you might find out more information about that. So the first question, Jamie gave a good medical analogy of why you might want to learn what's in your soil, about its health, its chemistry, its biology. And I'm just going to think about, or ask you to think about a few other questions about why you might want to learn what's in your soil. In particular, the kind of questions you might be able to answer are: what plants can I grow? Will they need fertilizer? Can I keep livestock on this soil? Can I bring in fill? Why won't my grass stay green? And in case you think those are all the kinds of questions you'll answer, you might also need to know, can I put in a septic tank? Can I dig a pond? Can I dig a hole at all, maybe for a well? Will my basement flood? Or a question I find all too often in this line of work is, if my kid just ate some dirt, should I be worried about it? These are small life questions you can answer by learning what's in your soil, but I also think it's important to look at big picture questions. Like, what makes this place, the place that I live in, that you live in, a specific place, what makes it unique? How can you take care of it, and how can you use it wisely, which is of course the mission of conservation in general, and a question that we're always asking ourselves in this office. To answer those questions, we're going to take a look at soil today from 3 different perspectives. The view from above, view that I just shared of one of my favorite places in the Swan Creek watershed in my home. The view from your backyard, or even the view from looking out your back door. And then that really fine-grained view, what can you see through a microscope? What can a lab tell you? And a question I always want people to keep in mind, if you're looking at any of these scales or any of these, the whole picture. Can you get the whole picture? Can you know exactly what's in your soil? But we're going to start with the view from above. And one of, I think, the most valuable tools that America and many other countries have developed in order to see this sort of big picture view for their soils, are the soil surveys. In the US, these began to be collected in the field in the 1930s and have been updated decade by decade ever since then. We're just going to take a quick overview of what's available now, what anyone in the US can find out from their soil surveys. As a historical record, there are many, many hard copies of soil survey books. Often they'll be in either your county extension office or your soil and water office. You can always call and ask to make copies. But through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they have been digitized, and there's now an incredible online resource that we're going to check out now, I hope. And that's the Web Soil Survey. And what you'll first come to, and we'll share this link, is an overview of the Web Soil Survey. Let me just make sure I can see it. If Jamie or anyone else can just drop in the chat if they're looking at the Web Soil Survey now instead of my presentation. Oh, okay, I'm going to switch 1 second. All right, hopefully you're seeing it now. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this is what that link will pull up. The Web Soil Survey starts with a few tools, a really simple overview on this first page, and then links along the side to let you know if you want to get more in depth with it. There's also the option, they have an app. It's not through the USDA. The federal government isn't quite to app level yet, but a California laboratory did produce an app using the same data. But today we're just going to work on the desktop version. And to get there, you start the WSS, and you should be presented with a map of the contiguous US. And to navigate this, you have a lot of options, but I find it easiest to just type in an address. We're going to take a look at the address that I showed the map of in my presentation. You'll notice that it took us to a close-up view of a particular address. And then you have buttons along the top that let you zoom in or out. And you can also use this hand to pan more precisely to a spot. Once you're looking at the area that you want to study further, you have two options to select an area of interest with the buttons at the top. I'm going to take, just for an example, both part of this field and the houses across the street from it, because I think it can be really instructive to look at those both. I'm going to select them both. Notice it shades in. It's letting me know that it can tell what information I want. And if I come to the top and tab over to Soil Map, it will both show me on the map and list all of the soils that are on this location. And I think it's really important to point out that this whole area was once farm fields. And even though all of this has gone into development, all of the same underlying soil patterns are still there, right? So if that's the case for almost anywhere you live, once there was something else there, but the soil is still going to affect your home, your building site, whatever else has gone there. So the quickest and simplest way to just pull information off of here that you can print out and be on your way is just to come over to the shopping cart tab. They really want you to know that even though they called this the shopping cart, they're not going to charge you anything. And with just the information of your soil type and your map, you can check out, ask for it now. If you check download later, it'll ask for an email and it'll email you a link. I do have my pop-up blocker enabled, so you do need to allow pop-ups. I'm gonna give that another shot. Check out, ask for it now. and you'll get a custom soil report for that address, which is hopefully what many of you received when you registered for this event and shared your address. And I'm going to pull out just a couple of notable things. It will send you that same map. I really encourage people to print this out. When you go do backyard investigations, take this with you and think about where you're standing in your yard relative to these underlying patterns, these underlying soil types. There's a lot more information, but the one that I want to review just now is for each soil. What the soil survey is going to give you is sort of a whole list of characteristics. It's like a character sheet. And to pull out and highlight a few of these, I always want to make sure people realize they can see the map, the setting of this soil. This will tell you basic facts about where you live. What's the expected annual precipitation? How long can you have an expected frost-free period? And then if you go down to a specific soil component, like a Delray loam, you find out what parent material, what bedrock, or in our case, glacial-lacustrine deposits are underlying that. You'll see this all over Northwest Ohio. We had a glacier come through, it made a lake, it left a deposit. And you can decode all of the descriptions in that same way. Something else that's important to highlight is that the soil survey wants to make sure you know that the soil on the surface of your property isn't the only characteristics. The farther you go down, they will change, and that's specific to the soil. Delray loam is Goldilocks, one of Goldilocks' perfect soils. It's a loam, but as you go deeper down in this area, you're going to get more clay, and even deeper, you're going to get more silt from that glacial till that was left behind. Other things that are important to pull out, often you'll find this question, the hydric soil rating. And I asked if you can fill a low spot in your yard. If a soil type says yes, hydric soil rating, I would really pause before I brought in fill to my property, because this indicates wetland soils. Often wetlands in the US are protected. There is the possibility that there are a really rare and incredible ecosystem can form on top of hydric soils. Often you'll find it's where water is sitting in your yard, and there's many other options for how you can address that area and even bring back older ecosystems or make it work for you. So those are just a few things that it's helpful to pull out of a soil survey. Another thing that'll pop up on here is the frequency of flooding and the frequency of ponding. This will help tell you whether you're going to have standing water on your property. So the soil report that you can download will break this down for each soil type that popped up. Let's see if I can come back here. So that's the sort of the first scrape of information that you can pull off of the web soil survey. And then we're going to check out just a couple other options that are available through this website. You can come up to the Soil Data Explorer and check out many, many ratings that the USDA has put together to characterize different soil types. These aren't all available everywhere. So when you enter your address and go to look into this, some of these might not pop up. But for us, often it's determined state by state and is set up for what are kind of the pressing concerns of your state. I'm going to immediately go to a pressing concern of very frequently flooded Northwest Ohio, whether or not a soil type or an area is suitable for building a basement. Whenever you pick one of these interactive options, it'll give you a little bit of explanation, and then you can view the rating, and it'll color code this your map according to whether or not the soil is rated for that use. If you scroll down past the map, you'll get a little bit more detail determined by soil type, as well as a reason for it rating that. This big red screen is typical in our area, and if you scroll down, you'll see that the explanation for this is that almost all of these soils have a shrink swell capacity, and almost all of these soils have a very high water table around here. So do you want to build a basement somewhere where the soil will move a lot and flood a lot? Maybe not. If you're from around here, you'll know that plenty of people build basements anyway, and that's true for a lot of the classifications that come up in the web soil survey. They're never saying you absolutely can't do that, but it might take soil amendments, a higher expense, a special permit, that sort of thing. And just check on my time. Okay. Pulling up just a couple more options on here. Something that often comes up is suitability for lawns and landscaping. If I go to view the rating, this option, you can see it's a little bit more encouraging than the dwellings with basements. So while there are still a few places, sorry to the folks on the corner, and a lot of times the red will pop up in the clay areas. If anyone's tried to grow sand or grow grass on clay, you'll probably understand why this is rated that way. But much of this area is in fact suitable for lawns. And I'm just gonna come down here. Once again, it talks about places where it's not limited. Again, there's that Goldilocks loam. There's no limitations there. Places where it's sandy or somewhat limited, again, that high water table. But then the other ones, especially the clays, there's gonna be flooding and ponding. It's tough to grow grass under those conditions. I'm gonna pop up one more under soil properties and qualities is the soil health properties. Jamie talked about this a little. It's great to pull up organic matter, which can have a big effect on your soil. You can send a sample into the lab to find this out, but before you do that, it's worth checking out the soil survey and seeing how much organic matter you can expect for a soil type. So before you do anything to that soil, what can you look for? I'm going to tell it just to ask the surface layer, which is typical for gardening. Let's rate the amount of organic matter on these soils. So once again, it's a big variation. Come back down here. A lot of those clays do have a high organic matter. Often a hydric soil will have a high organic matter. So the trade-off maybe for good drainage, you won't have that in a clay, but you might have a lot of organic matter and a great capacity to hold nutrients and offer those to the plants if you can solve the drainage issue. If you're interested in any of these interactive properties and you want to keep this information when you go offline, you can add that to the shopping cart. And then when you go to print that report, it'll show up all of the extra properties that you explored will show up in that report. You do have to check it out again. If I were to do that, it would think about it for a long time and then pop it open. And now I'll have that soil organic matter information in there. Again, there's so many properties in here. Something that's fairly new. If I close, I want to close all of them. The building site questions are these land classifications, or rather the vegetative productivity. Again, these are often regional, but many crop yields, specialty vegetables, and even forest productivity is available now in the web soil survey. I'm going to pull up, let's see if we've got one productivity here. And what the web soil survey is going to tell me type by type, how good that soil could be, or I should say, how tall a given species of tree could get on these soils. If I pull up instead the yield of a non-irrigated crop, I can pick corn. It will tell me the expected yield in bushels of corn on this property. This is corn country. It's pretty great. So there's just a huge range of possibilities in the web soil survey. Really encourage folks to check it out. And if you're local, please get in touch with us for questions you have interpreting it. And wherever you are in the US, you should also feel free to get in touch with your soil and water office. I'm just going to mention briefly that in addition to the web soil survey, there are these great, this is the typo, Sanborn fire insurance maps in Ohio. These are digitized and available online for free, which is an incredible resource, free with a library card, I should say. If you're interested in hard copies, ask your library. What these show is the history of the building development on top of any given property. Ours go back to 1870, which is just really incredible. And it's important to find that out because as much as your soil type will affect your property, if someone had a coal shed, a gas station, a creosote factory, or even a house that was painted with lead paint before 1978, if any of those things were once on your property and then knocked down, it's going to have a major impact on your soil. Drilling down, taking a look at the view from your backyard, these are questions you might think about. What do you want to grow where on your property? A good indication of what will grow in your yard is always what is growing in your yard already. Where the water is settling right now, current conditions. And then I think it's also helpful once you've done that soil survey to take a look at your backyard and see if it matches up, what you're expecting to see and what the soil types tell you should see. A great way to investigate your backyard is just to take some samples. You can divide your backyard up just by the conditions you're observing. Maybe you see erosion, see different colors of soil. You can print out your soil survey, take it out there and divide your backyard according to those zones that show up on your soil survey. Or it can also be helpful to divide your house by use. Maybe you want to grow azaleas right next to your house, but vegetables in the backyard. Maybe you have a high traffic area in your front yard. You can't keep the grass there. There's exposed soil and maybe you're worried about lead history there. So you can also divide your property by use. And once you have those different sampling zones, you can think about taking soil out of there, making the kind of observation Jamie talked about, texture, ribboning, whether it's clay or sand, and then also think about sending it to a lab. And this is a good setup for how you might collect samples to prepare for a lab. You want to be sure to use a clean tool for every zone. Stainless steel is the best to use to minimize contamination issues, but really any clean shovel or spade will work. But use a clean plastic bucket for every zone that you do. A great way to get a random-ish a pattern of soil samples within a zone is to just walk a zigzag across the property and take a soil sample at different locations while you're walking in that straight line so that you can get this distributed pattern here. And again, it's good to keep a map of where you sampled, but don't overthink this. It is impossible to know 100% across what is in your lawn. So instead think of getting a snapshot. To collect those samples, what it really matters, especially if you're collecting to send off to a lab, is to take the order form or the instruction sheet from that lab for what you're looking for and follow their instructions, because it's different depending on whether you're looking at soil health, whether you're looking at the health of your grass versus the health of root vegetables. So you want to tailor your collection to those questions. Labs will tell you what they need. The most important thing you should think about is how to keep within a zone between your samples, how to keep it consistent. But any of these processes will work. A soil and water lab can often loan you a probe, the one that Jamie described, excuse me. Or if you just want to use a shovel, you can take a slice of soil, pull the middle slice out of that, and then within your zone, you're going to mix all of your samples together in one bucket. And from that bucket, take about a cup of soil usually, and put it in either the bag that the lab provides or just a clean new Ziploc bag. So once you send that sample off to the laboratory, what will they see? What will they look for? A really common request for a laboratory is to get a nutrient panel. So the NPK that Jamie talked about, but then there's also other micronutrients. You can find many of these nutrients are just salts. So remember in high school chemistry, you can measure the content of different salts by dissolving in a solution, measuring the ions, or combining it with a reagent and looking for a reaction. This is just what labs are doing on a different scale. There are many different methods for these, but all of them are basically attempting to extract the nutrients that the plants would be extracting from your soil test. They're looking for plant available nutrient levels. Heavy metals are a little bit different. Essentially what they're going to do is, in layman's terms, torch the sample, get rid of everything that's not a heavy metal, and then use X-ray spectroscopy to determine what's left. These are not plant available levels. They're just going to find the total amount of lead, the total amount of arsenic, all of those heavy metals that is in your soil. They're not going to be able to tell you with any reliability how much of that heavy metal your plant will take up. So this is a thing where often they'll send you a range and say, be concerned above this level, instead of precise information about the plant available levels. Another thing that they can, set of questions they can answer about a lab are the soil health questions. This is a pretty rapidly evolving field and there's new opportunities all the time. Often they'll use a gas analyzer to measure the amount of carbon dioxide your soil is giving off, because what they're measuring is the breathing, the respiration of the microbiology in your soil. They might also weigh the organic matter. So that's the food supply, the carbon and nitrogen that are available to, again, the microbes in your soil. So all of these new and evolving techniques are trying to figure out just how active the soil microbes are. The more activity in there, the more they will be able to support the plants, hold on to water, and produce healthy plants. These are the big picture questions that a laboratory is seeking to answer about your soil sample. Something that you might expect for each of these to get each of these questions answered. These are typical ranges in our area for a single sample. So you will get a whole nutrient panel for $10 to $30. Heavy metals, often if you want a whole suite of heavy metals, they're going to cost $50 to $100. And then soil health, I said 10 to 50, but I would say this is, again, rapidly evolving. And as things get more sophisticated, the measurements might get more expensive. This is a typical order form. They're going to ask for your contact information, a little bit about what you're looking for from them, how you treat your soil already, and then you would put sample by sample the order. You can take your standard, this nutrient panel, NPK, plus a few other things, an organic matter sample, and then they have individual add-ons often that you can look for. I have said, I feel like so many times they said methods vary, but there are a few things that shouldn't vary and that you should be looking for from any lab that you send a sample. They should give you specific instructions on how to prepare your sample for the questions that you're asking. They should tell you what the testing methods they use are. Again, because the methods vary, you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples, and that if you had gotten tests previously or you're going to, again, you're using the same methods or comparable ones. And they should give you some context for the results. So this is a fertility, a nutrient analysis, and a soil health analysis from a lab. And at the bottom, they don't just tell you the absolute numbers, but they tell you what your plants might be expected to need, how much additional nutrients they would need. And if you tell them what you're trying to grow, I think this one is for corn specifically, they'll tailor this to your plants that you need. Again, they put the methods down here for the tests they use, and are telling you up here, they just do a general soil health index, but they do tell you that they used a gas analyzer and some more information about what they, how they derived these results. Where to find a lab? There are both commercial and university labs, and I think there's no significant difference in quality. Labs are getting up to date. I see a few that will take online orders and payments. Often it's still mail in a check with a paper order. The OSU extension actually provides a great nationwide, or slightly Midwest focused, but available all over, a list of sources linked here. And then if you can't find what you need here or locally, you can always contact your local extension office, and we'll send this out with a list of all the extension offices in the US who should be able to help you find a lab. That's the overview that I have. If people have further questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if you think of something at 2 o'clock in the morning today, feel free to follow up with us afterwards.
One that I saw was about the worm bin. Conflicting things lately about composting for garden soil usage. Use or not coffee grounds or onion waste. I read they kill worms and that affects the composting ability. Well, I've read a few of those things too. What I'm seeing though here in our worm bin at our office is we've been putting coffee grounds in since 2003. Have not had any issues, but we're not putting mega doses of it in, just a regular, okay, somebody made some coffee at the office, maybe once a week or so, put that in there. We've not had that problem. I know there are some commercial worm companies that get large amounts of coffee grounds from big coffee retail establishments like Starbucks or whatnot. So I would just limit it, see how it goes. I've always read that coffee grounds were acidic, so that was something you could put out if you're trying to acidify your soil, but most recently read that that's really not doing much. A lot of that has been leached out of those coffee grounds and is now in your cup of coffee, so maybe not so much with the acid, but is it the caffeine? Again, most of that has been leached out too. So I've not here in our office had any particular problems with worms and coffee grounds. But again, give it a try a little, see how it goes. Or just put them out in the garden, maybe scratch them in and see what happens out there in your garden soil. Onions are mostly, from what I understand, is a matter of just that there's such a strong odor that it's just kind of an offensive thing, too much, too strong, just like it is for us. Maybe it's something in the sulfur compounds in the onion as well, but the dry skins of the onion are not. That's pretty much just like a dry leaf. So you could put those in, but we do not put onions in our worm bin here. The other thing would be citrus, because of the acid in that citrus, that does have it. A orange peel from your lunch or your breakfast is not a problem, but if you just made lemonade with a dozen lemons and you have all of that material, I would not put all of that in a worm bin all at once as well, just too much acid for them. But those are the main biggies, and of course no fats, no meat, nothing like that in your worm bin. And if you're putting paper in, only put in non-glossy, so you can put in newsprint or even a sale flyer that is printed on a dull, not glossy. But if it is the shiny paper, magazine paper, don't put that in. But the rest of the paper, you can put in brown paper bags, you can put in your newspaper, you can put in a paper towel, anything like that should be fine. I hope that answered your question. I saw another question in the chat. Let's see if Jessica is on. It was more about the soil data in the soil survey.
Hey everyone, I'm really glad that someone asked about the data gathered to fill these in, because it's a sort of an untold story in American history and in natural resources history. When the Natural Resources Conservation Service was formed in the 30s as a response to a Dust Bowl, one of the highest priorities was characterizing the soils of the US. And so Soil Conservation Service employees were sent out to survey every county across the US. Many of the soils that we are looking at in the soil surveys, many of those areas have actually been walked historically by a soil surveyor, or many of them are filled in on topological maps that were produced by the United States Geological Survey in partnership with the NRCS. It's an ongoing process, and it's always being updated. I believe Alaska has recently completed its soil surveys, and field work to complete those surveys was still going on. They were digging soil pits and characterizing the soil and filling in those maps in the early 2000s. So some of it is field work, walking the land and conducting those soil tests, and the rest of it often is filled in using those topological maps. That's a great question. Great. I didn't see any other questions.